Welcome to this video. Today I'm breaking down my top 3 favorite glute exercises that I'm using to build my glutes back up and that I used in the past to grow my glutes the first time. And I won't be including squats in this video because they're kind of like the go-to that everyone already knows and that everyone already loves. So in this video, I'm breaking down my top 3 favorite exercises, the form for them, and also specific cues that will help you actually really feel them in your glutes. Because sometimes, you just need a little extra adjustment and then all of a sudden, bam, the glutes are fired up. All right, exercise number 1 is going to be our barbell RDL or your dumbbell RDL. RDL being your Romanian deadlift. So for this exercise, which is going to be a hip hinge movement that challenges your glutes when they're in the lengthened or the stretched position, it's basically going to be me holding a weight, setting my hips back, and you can see my glutes really stretched here. And then I'm gonna squeeze my glutes to return back up to the position. That's the whole exercise. Now I'm gonna go through form and then a few different ways that you can really tweak it so you feel it in your glutes and not your lower back, not your knees, not your hammies, but specifically the glutes. So now if you're new to RDLs, I recommend you start with these dumbbells. They're just easier to get the movement down before moving it into the barbell because it is a little bit more awkward with the barbell. I just prefer the barbell because it does start a bit heavier, so it's easy to load up and add more weight on. But definitely get comfortable with the dumbbells first. So you want your feet to be a belt shoulder width apart. Toes can be slightly turned outwards. Focus on sending your hips backwards. And as you send your hips backwards, hinging at your hips, your chest just comes down. And as soon as your barbells come around the knee, a little bit lower than the knee, hinging back up. So I'm lowering, I'm lowering, I'm lowering. There's a big stretch of my glutes. Barbells around knee height. And I'm squeezing my glutes to come back up. I'm not letting the dumbbells come out in front of my knee like this. This is bad form. This puts a lot of pressure on my back as opposed to my glutes. One thing I want to think about is keeping the weight close to my shins. I'm bending up my knees here. So you really got to think about sending the hips backwards. It's my favorite cue. Another thing is really driving through your heels here. Less weight in your toes, more weight in your heels, and that's going to help you connect to your glutes. The last thing that I really used to mess up doing when I was doing barbell or dumbbell RDLs, I would go too far deep into the stretch. So if you're feeling the RDL in your hamstrings, which are kind of around this area, less the glutes, lower in the thigh, then what you're doing is you're going too deep into the stretch. An RDL can be used to target your hamstrings or your glutes a bit more. It just depends on what you're trying to go for. And if you're trying to target the hamstrings, then you just go deeper into the stretch. So here, I'm really feeling it in my hammies. This is a bit too low for a glute-focused RDL. This, pure hamstring. Focusing on stopping right here. This is when my glutes, this is fully glutes. If I go any lower than this, it's gonna be a hamstring exercise. So stopping around the knee or a little bit lower, but if you go too low, you'll feel it in your hammies. It's not too complicated and it's a great exercise. I'm gonna show you with some working weight now what it looks like. I almost forgot something that's super important, guys. One thing that you can think about in all of these exercises, specifically this one and the next one, driving through your heels. Instead of your toes, driving through your heels is going to help you connect with your glutes much more. So when I'm doing the RDL, pushing with my heel. And then also in your RDL specifically, one thing that one of my friends who's a PT told me, and that really helped me when I was starting to do RDLs, think about you having a piece of paper between your feet and you're standing on it and you want to rip the paper apart. You don't notice it as much, but this is me just standing. This is me ripping the paper. So I'm literally just firing up and engaging my outer glutes, the sides of my legs a little bit here, but specifically when I go into that hip stretch here with the RDL, I'm really gonna feel it and it's gonna help me target my glutes so much more. So think about just ripping that piece of paper beneath your feet. Amazing. All right, on to my second and my favorite exercise ever for glutes, which is gonna be our hip thrust, our good old hip thrust. And I'm gonna show you 3 different hip thrust variations today, just because I love it so much. But I'll show you the go-to, which is the classic hip thrust, and then we'll go through the casts, and then we'll go through B-stance hip thrust. As you can see, I'm using a Smith machine because it is easier to set up. If you have a hip thrust machine in your own gym, go for that because it's just 10,000 times easier. But if you're working with the barbell in the free weight section, just like we were just doing with the RDLs, or if you have a Smith machine, you can set it up either way. Hip thrust is going to train the glutes in the shortened movement, in hip extension. So this is basically going to be a hip thrust right here, starting from a low position. You see the glutes here are stretched, but then we're squeezing them to be in hip extension here. And that's basically, this is the hip thrust motion. Ladies, get yourself a pad. Doing hip thrusts without one of these is basically just pure torture. Would not recommend. It'll really hurt your hips. So grab a pad, grab a yoga mat, something to protect your hip bones, because otherwise it's gonna really hurt. Now let's talk setup for the hip thrust. One of the most common mistakes that I see in the hip thrust, and that I've done in the past in the hip thrust too, is feeling it not in your glutes, but in your hamstrings or your quads. So hamstrings back of your thigh, quads front of your thigh. And this, it comes down to foot positioning and foot placement. When we're in the hip thrust, oh my gosh, I moved my bench. When we're at the top portion of the hip thrust, we want our thighs to be perpendicular with our shins. This should be a 90-degree angle. So this is about good foot placement for me. But if my feet were to be a bit farther away from me, I would start feeling it more in my hamstrings. And if my feet were too close to me, about here, there's less than a 90-degree angle at the top. This is a quad dominant exercise. So you really got to find that good 90-degree positioning with your feet. This might take a little bit of trial and error to figure out the first few times, but once you figure out the foot positioning, it will get easier after that to just go right to that spot, and you'll just know where to move your feet. So it's come naturally. I'm gonna add weight and then show you the second biggest mistake I've seen. Okay, now I've got a little bit of weight on here. Let me show you mistake number 2, which I did for the longest amount of time. Now, guys, if you're not feeling hip thrust in your glutes, it might be because you're not engaging your core. I used to super arch my back. This happens when you don't think about bracing your core, and also when you're working with a weight that's too heavy. So what you don't want to do is arch your lower back. Here, you can see my glutes are locked up. My back is pretty neutral. If I were to be arching my lower back instead of squeezing with my glutes to get to the top here, I'm really squeezing with my glutes. This is what we want. If I were arching my back, it might look more like this, where you can see I've got an extra stretch in my lower back and my glutes are kind of just taking standby. We don't want that. We don't want this type of arched lower back. We want to keep our core engaged, and that means the entire movement is going to have tension on your glutes. We want our core to be engaged the entire movement because that's going to train your glutes the entire time. It's not going to put added pressure on your back. It's going to become a more glute dominant exercise. So this is what that looks like. Now, I did promise that we would talk about 2 different other types of glute exercises for 3 total. So the normal hip thrust, you're going to be going through the complete down-up range in motion. I do want to mention the CAS glute bridge as well, which is when you're just training the upper shortened portion of the movement. So the upper top bit where you're really squeezing your glute the whole time. It's also a little bit harder to see because this Smith machine does limit my range in motion a little bit. But for the CAS glute bridge, you're going to see that I'm just squeezing at the top portion of the movement here. So good for supersets. And then the last variation of hip thrust that I want to show you is B stance. B stance is going to be slightly more of a single leg dominant exercise. It's going to train one side of your glutes, one side of your glutes, lol, one of your glutes a little bit more than the other, which means you need to do B stance hip thrust for one leg, then switch your feet and do the other leg. And this is also going to help if you have any muscle imbalances in your glutes because you're working one leg at a time. This is another tip for my short girlies out there. I'm 5'2". I don't know if you can tell, but sometimes one thing that can prevent you from really feeling hip thrust in your glutes is if your bench is too high. So sometimes commercial gym benches can be a little bit too tall, and that can make it harder for you to feel it in your glutes because you can't reach full hip extension. Basically, I can't lock out into a flat line at the top when I'm finishing my hip thrust. One thing that helps is elevating your feet. So sometimes I like to grab a plate, stick it on the floor, that raises my feet and basically like lowers the height of what this bench would be, which works well enough for me. I always use the plate when I'm doing B stance hip thrust because I don't feel the difference as much when I'm doing normal hip thrust, but I really feel it when I'm doing B stance. So this is our B stance right here. So B stance is basically you're going to have one dominant foot in the normal position. We're going to go with my right foot for now. My left foot is basically just going to be staggered slightly. It's still there for balance, but it's not working. So the driver is going to be my right foot, and you can see my left foot is basically just going to be slightly back more and out to the side. It's going to be really subtle. I'm going to be driving through the heel of this glute. This one's just here for show. So that was hip thrust, cast, which is just the top bit, and then B stance, which is going to be more of a single leg, 1 foot staggered. And the third exercise, which is not our least, it's our last but not our least, is going to be our hip abductor, which is on the adductor abductor machine. I know it's like a little tongue twist. Basically, it's our outer thighs. So this machine is super useful. A lot of gyms have them. If your gym has one, we're going to go through it right now. So while seated, you want the pads as close together as possible, not starting from the far position. That's going to be training your adductors, which are your inner thighs. We're training our abductors, which are outer thighs, but to make it a little tweak so that this exercise really challenges our upper glutes, specifically the upper glutes. One thing that we do here is when you put your feet on the pads, we're going to bend forward. And that's what's going to really help stretch the glutes and isolate the upper glutes. So one thing that I do here, this is up seated. This is really going to target the outer thigh. I'm really feeling it about here right now. But as soon as I stretch about 30 degrees forward, super easy adjustment. Now it's all here. So that's upper glutes. What did you say, Jensen?
A cliff. That's how we build a shelf.
That's it. That's how we build a shelf. Okay, I'm gonna show form. For these, I really prefer sticking to a higher rep range, so a little bit less work in that lower rep range, around 6 to 8 reps. For these, I really prefer to stick between 10 and 15 reps, especially towards that 12 to 15 rep range. I really feel the burn, so higher volume with these, but they burn up the glutes. It's great. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you try out these exercises. Let me know which one's your favorite, and I will see you in the next video.